Have you given any thought to contributing to the melt? It's easy to do. Just click the Patreon link in the episode notes, and for as little as $3 a month, you can get access to bonus episodes, early access to regular episodes, and you can also participate in monthly Zoom meetups. It helps to keep the magic happening here at the Melt. So I encourage you to karmically entangle yourself with the Melt today by subscribing monthly for less than the price of a container of goatee wax, or a prosthetic pinky, or a half stick of DMT butter, or an inflatable casket, or the shrunken head of an Atlantean supermodel, or a woolly mammoth's merkin, or a crystalline replica of Baba Yaga's hut, or a capsule of Sasquatch dander. Hello, my name is Chris Snipes, and you are listening to The Melt. This is a scene from the 1993 film Naked, directed by Mike Leigh. The main character, Johnny, who is astoundingly smart but all too cynical, has taken to drifting from one dark scene to another, and in this one, he stumbles upon a security guard of an empty building where this conversation ensues.
Step this way. I want to reveal to you the mysteries of my trade. What do you think that is?
A Dadaist nun?
Wrong. This little lady is the representative of my employer.
How'd you do, love?
Watch.
Very zen.
My existence at this moment on this spot is now trapped and recorded. 23 moments, 23 sights every 2 hours. That's my job.
Well, could they not train a tall chimpanzee to do that? Or a small chimpanzee with a bigger gizmo?
But they could, yes.
What's your name, son?
Brian.
Hello, Brian. Johnny. Well, Brian, congratulations. You succeeded in convincing me that you do have the most tedious fucking job in England.
Come on. Yes. Boring job. Bloody boring, actually.
All right.
But all you can see is the tip of the iceberg. The present, the tedious here and now. What you're incapable of seeing is the rest of time, the rest of the iceberg. The past and the future. My future, which is a very interesting place to be. And the thing about this job is that it gives me time and space to contemplate the future at my leisure, whilst the city sleeps, free from the cacophonous curiosity of the hoi polloi. So you see, it's not a boring job. And I'm not boring either.
Am I allowed to smoke on the stairs?
No, there's alarms all over the building.
So you think you can make the present palatable by projecting into the future? You're living in the past, pal. It's the future that fucks you up, Brian. It's the maggot in the apple. You see, you're all pissed off with the present, right? And there's nothing wrong with the present. The present's fine. The present's perfect. The present's peachy fucking creamy. The only thing wrong with the present is the bastard doesn't exist. Because the present is the future and the future is the past. And it's all the same fucking bag of bones anyway. It's a constant process of coming into being and passing away, coming into being and passing away. The future is now.
But the present does exist. We're in it now.
You were just then when you said it, but you're not in it now. You're not in it now. You're not in it now. You're forever being kicked up the arse by the future. You with me?
That's what I mean. You see, I'm in the present. But I'm not in the present. I'm in the future. Exactly.
Has nobody not told you, Brian, that you've got this kind of gleeful preoccupation with the future? I wouldn't even mind, but you don't even have a fucking future. I don't have a future. Nobody has a future. The party's over. Take a look around you, man. It's all breaking up. Are you not familiar with the book of Revelations of St. John, the final book of the Bible, prophesying the apocalypse?
Yes, as it happens, I'm familiar with all the books of the Bible.
I'm very happy for you. He forced everyone to receive a mark on his right hand or on his forehead so that no one shall be able to buy or sell unless he has the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of his name, and the number of the beast is 666.
666, I know about it.
Great.
I know about Nostradamus. Nostradamus talked about 3 brothers. Now, did he mean the Kennedy brothers, or was he talking about 3 bits of the Soviet Union? You see, you just can't tell.
Fuck Nostradamus. I'm not talking about Nostradamus, a Mother Shipton, a Russell Grant, a Mystic fucking Meg. I'm talking about the holy fucking book. What can such a specific prophecy mean? What is the mark? Well, the mark, Brian, is the barcode, the ubiquitous barcode that you'll find on every bog roll and every packet of Johnnies and every poxy pork pie. And every fucking barcode is divided into 2 parts by 3 markers. And those 3 markers are always represented by the number 6. 6, 6, 6. Now, what does it say? No one shall be able to buy or sell without that mark. And now, what they're planning to do in order to eradicate all credit card fraud and in order to precipitate a totally cashless society, what they're planning to do, what they've already tested on the American troops, they're going to subcutaneously laser tattoo that mark onto your right hand or onto your forehead. They're going to replace plastic with flesh. Fact. In the same book of Revelations, when the 7 seals are broken open on the day of judgment and the 7 angels blow the trumpets, when the 3rd angel blows her bugle, wormwood will fall from the sky. Wormwood will poison a 1/3 part of all the waters and a 1/3 part of all the land, and many, many, many people will die. Now, do you know what the Russian translation for wormwood is?
No.
Chernobyl. Fact. On August the 18th, 1999, the planets of our solar system are going to line up into the shape of a cross.
I don't believe in astrology.
I'm not talking about astrology, I'm talking about astronomy. They're going to line up in the fixed signs of Aquarius, Leo, Taurus and Scorpio, which just happen to correspond to the 4 beasts of the apocalypse as mentioned in the book of Daniel. Another fucking fact. Do you want me to go on? The end of the world is nigh, bride. The game is up.
I don't believe that. Life can't just come to a stop.
All right, I'm not saying that life will end or the world will end or the universe will cease to exist, but man will cease to exist. Just like the dinosaurs passed into extinction, the same thing will happen to us. We're not fucking important. We're just a crap idea.
I'm not going to cease to exist. I'm going to be here in the future.
What is this fucking fixation with the future? Listen, pal, I've got chronic systolic palpitations and acute fucking neuralgia. What about these toilets? Can I smoke in here?
No, you fucking can't! Let me ask you a question.
What?
Have you ever had the sense that you've lived in a time different from this one?
What, you mean like in a past life?
Could be, yeah.
Yeah, well, in my past life, I was dead.
Oh, you see, I wasn't. I know I was here in the past, before I was born. So I know I'm going to be here in the future after I've died.
I see. And in this alternative existence, did you still have the same noxious body odour?
It's not going to be personal. It's what I believe.
Shall I tell you what I believe?
You don't believe in anything.
Oh, I do, Brian.
Yeah? What do you believe?
Do you think that the amoeba ever dreamed that it would evolve into the frog? Of course it didn't. And when that first frog shimmied out of the water and employed its vocal cords in order to attract a mate or to retard a predator, do you think that that frog ever imagined that that incipient croak would evolve into all the languages of the world, into all the literature of the world? Of course it fucking didn't. And just as that froggy could never possibly have conceived of Shakespeare, so we can never possibly imagine our destiny.
I know what my destiny is.
Yeah, but what you're experiencing, as far as I can gather, with all these manifestations of regression and precognition and transmigratory astral fucking chatterings, is just the equivalent of that first primeval grunt. Because evolution isn't over. Man isn't the be-all and fucking end-all. Look, if you take the whole of time represented by 1 year, we're only in the first few moments of the 1st of January. There's a long way to go. Only now we're not going to sprout extra limbs and wings and fins because evolution itself is evolving. And And whereas you, through some process of extra sensory recall, might imagine that you were some 17th century little Dutch girl living in a windmill in old Amsterdam, one day you'll realise that you've had not just one or two past or future existences, but that you were and are everybody and everything that has ever been or will ever be.
Hang on a minute. You've just contradicted yourself.
Oh, and how do you make that out?
Downstairs, you were predicting the end of the world. Now you're talking about the future. How do you explain that, eh?
Easy. When it comes, the apocalypse itself will be part of the process of that leap of evolution.
Yeah. Well, whatever happens, mankind will not cease to exist.
It must. By the very definition of apocalypse, mankind must cease to exist, at least in a material form.
What do you mean in a material form?
Well, he'll evolve.
What into?
Into something that transcends matter. Into a species of pure thought. Are you with me?
Yeah. Like a ghost.
Oh, not like a fucking ghost, you big girl's blouse. Into something that's like well beyond our comprehension. Into a universal consciousness. Into God, who is, by the same principle that time is.
Whereas I don't agree with Johnny's outlook, I think that he is describing what we are supposed to perceive as something inevitable. Yet, his concept of the unified nature of everything and everyone is real. So, his assessment is both a retelling of the prevailing apocalyptic myth of our time and a realization that we are all interconnected. What he fails to perceive is that because of that very interconnection, we can collectively awaken from our slumber and realize that this revelation malarkey won't fly in a world where we don't allow it to happen. The trick to not allowing it to happen is self-reflective realization. This will, in turn, usher in collective realization. As I am positive many of you know already, there is much more going on behind the scenes than meets the eye. I'm not talking about reptilian shape-shifting elite bloodlines who have controlled humanity's destiny for countless centuries, or some Bavarian Illuminati secret society who influences the world from behind closed doors. I'm talking about a technocratic dystopia summoned by the likes of none other than regular, cold-blooded businessmen who desire to control and regulate all aspects of our lives. Through an aggressive campaign of invasive data harvesting and the insidious introduction of a pale digital doppelganger of our world and its inhabitants, these people are trying to enslave us through the very technology that we seem to be hypnotized by. It starts with seemingly harmless things like Second Life and Pokemon Go, and leads to passports which allow you to work, eat, travel, and have access to medical care, to a social credit system to regulate compliance to the state, quantum dot tattoos, and a manufactured virtual reality that will make the Oasis look like Toad's Wild Ride. This system is fast being hailed as something innovative by calling it the Fourth Industrial Revolution, when really it much more resembles some of the darker science fiction that's come out in the last 50 years. Will this all actually happen? In large part, that is up to us. They need our participation to succeed. And the most effective way to gain that participation is to try to convince us that we need things outside of ourselves to be happy and healthy, to separate us from each other and nature, and to try to hoodwink us into thinking that we don't matter. Well, we matter quite a lot. Our thoughts matter, our actions matter, and our motivations behind both matter. Whatever motivates today's guest, Alison McDowell, is something we all need more of. She is a dot connector extraordinaire, and her impeccable research has led her to some very mind-blowing places, as I'm sure that you will agree. I start off the conversation by asking Alison how it was that she got into all of this.
I live in Philadelphia, and I've lived here for since the mid 1990s, and beyond being a big city, with an interesting history, I never really fully appreciated the scope of all the different aspects of sort of geopolitics, as well as like going back to esoteric histories and different things that came along until about, a lot of it during COVID, but my activism really started out, I'm I'm a mom. My child is now in college. But they went through all 13 years in the Philadelphia public schools, which has been a crucible for most privatization, experimentation, technology, neoliberal, dissection of public policy.
Yes.
And so I got a front row seat on that. And our experience was that my child was actually pretty good at navigating it, and we got lucky in terms of the schools that they were in, but we were sort of thrown together in 2013, I believe it was, when Boston Consulting Group was brought in by the School Reform Commission, which was at that point the state had taken over the school district, so there was no elected local accountability to the school board, and they had brought in this consulting firm to essentially take it apart. And so they had proposed closing 23 schools, which is a lot of schools. Well, actually, they did. They closed 23 schools, and they laid off 3,000 teachers at that time.
That's insane.
And we have, I think, a couple 100,000 kids, and they're predominantly Black and brown kids, low-income kids in the public system. And then this happened in the sort of late spring, early summer budget season. And then in late July, early August, they threw out that they were going to have a series of public meetings about grading the schools. So they throw everything into disruption and, explode everything and then say, okay, now we're going to come up with a new report card to score you. And I was really angry about that because at the time I was still so naive. I didn't realize that things were broken on purpose, right? Things became broken on purpose to advance certain agendas. And I still had a sense of fortitude that this was not right. And, whenever these people come up with meetings in the dog days of summer, it means they don't expect anyone to come because you don't have childcare or you're on vacation. And so I beat the bushes and we got 40 people to show up to these, I don't know, late 20-year-old, 30-year-old functionaries who are supposed to stand in front of the room and check the box that they'd done the thing, right? There was no meaningful input. And we were there going, no, you can't do this stuff. This is wrong. And there was supposed to be a series of 6 meetings. I had found out that the funder of this initiative, Beyond the School Report Card, was about consolidating all of the applications for school choice. So it was for public schools, magnet schools, charter schools, private schools, Catholic schools. They were going to try to consolidate that all into one system outside the public school system entirely. And this was all being funded by the Dell Foundation, the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, which at the time I was like, oh, because you're selling your computers. It's, you're selling all the computers. And, so we contested it. And then after that, this was the first meeting. And they said, oh, we're canceling those 5 other meetings. Now we're going to have a focus group.
Wow.
So it's just in your face. It's no, we've decided we're not actually doing the fake public version. We're just going to engineer our own. And the people went the next day to the next meeting. There was just a little taped sign on the door saying this meeting is canceled.
What?
So that was my introduction to the in your face brokenness of the Philadelphia political system. And we're a city that's run by Democrats, right? In this larger, my awakening to all of this, it's the more you realize it's about power and domination and class systems and not so much about the electoral politics. Mm-hmm. You can put whoever you want in front of this machine and the machine still runs the way it's supposed to run.
Of course. So then you found the system was broken, but then that led to a whole different level of things. I mean, you found all of these systemic things that were going on that I'm assuming that you weren't aware of to begin with. Well,
I think that the system is set up that people are supposed to be pretty siloed, from one another's lived experience, right? And so you unless you're someone who is able to bootstrap it from a challenging early child, into a stable, affluent community, you kind of track along with your own folks, and you don't mix it up that much with other people. And so that was the benefit for me of being in a public school system in a large urban city, was that all of a sudden, parents, all of whom cared about their kids' education, were thrown into this same mix and advocating for the rights of all the kids, right? To not be, thrown under the bus by this system. And so people with very different life experiences, like I had a chance to work with them, as collaborators, right? As peers, even though like we were coming with a lot of different skill sets, which was pretty amazing and opened the door to me to a lot of places and, how people live from a level playing field, right? To see what that was, because again, our city is a city that's, predominantly Black and low income as a city, but surrounded by very affluent suburbs and is enmeshed in academic and university systems that are also very influential, including the University of Pennsylvania. So there's this juxtaposition of what's going on. So that was where I sort of came into things. I met some really wonderful people that I collaborated with, but the challenge is that everyone is kept in crisis so that you're responding to the next crisis and you don't have time to regroup and pull back and see the bigger picture. And the people who are rolling out these agendas, they have 20, 30, 50-year plans. And a lot of times it's a shock doctrine, a shock event, and then they create change agents, and then they shift you bit by bit to where they want you to go. And so people are scrambling to react to all of these immediate challenges that they face. And so it's very hard to get your feet under you and actually get a perspective. And so that was my experience organizing with the teachers and the parents, was that people were just trying to get through the day. Right?
Yeah, of course.
And fortunately, like I had a position where I have was working part-time. So I had a chunk of time to devote to getting the bigger picture. But trying to break through to people, and there's not an easy solution. What we're going up against is like 400 years of domination, back to the Roman Empire and the Vatican, like if you want to go that far. So it seems very overwhelming. If someone can't say, okay, here's 3 steps to do to like make progress, they don't really want to hear you, because they're like, why are you dragging me down with all this information I can't do anything about?
Exactly. And
so, yeah.
And that's even before you got into all of this, like coming across BitChain and all of the stuff that entailed. I mean, how did you break into that world of going from school closings to just really seeing how all of this stuff was engineered? Like we're all, in a sense, being engineered towards certain outcomes.
Yeah. Well, so there's a really wonderful activist in Philadelphia. Her name is Sherry Honkala, and she's spent most of her, all of her adult life being an advocate around housing rights. And she's been a homeless mother and a very high profile figure, but she was organizing the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign, which is not the Poor People's Campaign. This is a separate organization that was led by the poor, that was not taking foundation money, because all of the foundation money is what is driving the impact investing markets that I'm sure we'll talk about later. And so it turned out one of Sherry's children was in the same school. It was a magnet school where my child was attending. And so we connected over opposing the standardized tests, which were the tool of destruction that were being used against the schools. And so I said, I'm not getting through to the teachers, that I'm not getting through in the education space. And this machine of turning people into data is going not just the children and the teachers, but it's going after people who are housing insecure. It's going after people who are food insecure. It's going after people with, mental health challenges. It's going after people with addiction issues. And we're all of those things. Philadelphia is the center of the opioid crisis and high poverty. And, there's a lot going on here. So I'm like, well, if I can't organize within the education space, I'm going to take this toolkit and find someone else who has the wherewithal to also organize with me. And so Sherry was that person, for a while. But even in that space, she was very much about immediate mutual aid, getting people into housing. And so even in that space, it's been very hard to pull back and talk about the policy, like how the machine works and what the implications of where the machine is going. Because when we're looking at housing, we can't look at what's happening now outside the lens of what happened with the last global economic crash, which is around housing. And during that was a controlled demolition in which Blackstone among others, scooped up all of these homes that were foreclosed on and then kept them as rental housing. And so these large multinational interests that are tied in with, pharmaceuticals and genetic engineering and AI and technology, like now they're all going to run your housing too, right? And so you these big, like, sweeping trajectories, I mean, are something that I think for the most part people are taught to stay in their lane. Like, I do housing or I do this. And I'm like, no. Like, my thing is, like, I kind of have a schema for how this machine works. And I'm just going to apply it to a bunch of different things until I find someone I can apply it to that we can collaborate and try to, at this point, it's hard to say how you would stop the whole thing. But at least to me, my intent in all of this is to remove plausible deniability.
Yeah.
Because a lot of what is happening under faux progressivism,
yes,
social justice, and equity. And it absolutely is not that. These are systems that are fronts for a predatory global finance and the military and defense sectors, and really awful psychological warfare on people. And so I show up to say, I see you and I know what you're doing. Somebody out there knows what you're doing. And, like, if there's karma, just so you know, we get you. Someone sees you in this. And so you can proceed. You can continue with what you're doing, but don't think that we don't actually know what the plan is, because some of us do. And even if we can't stop you, we can say at the end of the day, when someone said, how did this all happen? We've documented it, right? So you can't say you didn't know because I showed up and told you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's quite an undertaking. So you've talked about the machine. Maybe let's outline what this machine is. What is its motivations?
Oh, well,
dive in wherever you want.
Onion, right? Like I was thinking, this is about high stakes standardized testing and school closures. No. And then I thought it was about poverty, and no. And then I thought it was about the built environment and smart cities, and no. Like, it just keeps getting bigger. And so all of this was work I had been doing for 4 or 5 years before this global health biosurveillance state locked in. And that took me totally by surprise, because it never occurred to me. Like, I had done some work around digital nudges and healthcare management systems and Internet of Things wearable technology tied to healthcare. Public health, like pandemic, global systems control, was not anything that I imagined. But clearly, like, within the first 2 days that they sent us home from work and everyone was on parroting the same lines, don't kill grandma and flatten the curve and all these things. I'm like, oh, this is it.
Yeah.
This is it. This is how they're going to do it, right? You've got an invisible enemy,
yes,
and you've got everyone that you have to participate or you're a terrible person. Mm-hmm. And they have the asymptomatic piece. So, like, you might feel like you're fine, but you could be a killer and not know it. And like, the whole schema was perfect. I mean, Absolutely. If it wasn't so evil, like, you have to give it to them that it was quite cunning the way they manipulated people's, because most people want to be good. Like, most people want to do the right thing. But I knew right away exactly what it was. And so even over the course of this last 18 months, for me, I spent the first 8 to 10 months going, folks, all you folks who are concentrated on the health aspect, it's bigger. Let me tell you how it's bigger. Because once it's about biometric surveillance and digital identity, and once they get you in this biometric digital identity, then all of the other bets that are placed on managing people as pawns in this global game of hedge funds, whether that's your compliance around your health, your compliance around how you're trained, what your mindset is, what food you're eating, all of these things are going to come off of this digital identity. So that was my big push, and it still kind of is. I mean, at this point, many more people are grasping the medical passport system and the digital identity and what that means with social credit scoring. Those first months, people did not have that information. So that was, for me, I'm like, the end game is these human capital bets. It's channeling global capital through this, what they call it ESG investing, environmental social governance. So good, green, interfacing with the whole climate agenda, because just as they channeled the capital through the bundled mortgages in 2008, when that game crashed and the wealth became further concentrated, the only thing bigger to channel global capital through is life, is bodies, like human bodies as well as other living things, is the synthetic biology and the bio-nanotechnology. That's the only thing bigger than land and property and real estate was life. And so I was like, guys, this is what it is. But then, then the next phase was my friend Joseph, who is spent his career in he's a combat veteran, but also in AI and gaming design and blockchain, and and we've collaborated because he knew the mechanics of how the mechanical electronic engineering system would work, but he didn't have the finance piece. So we brought those two pieces together. He came across something. It was a contest, one of these, global contests around Evolution 2.0. And essentially, it was George Church, who's out of Harvard, and a gentleman, I think he invented the pacemaker, out of Oxford, and someone at Florida State, and a businessman. They have this competition with the prize money is only $10 million, which is not really all that much, but it's around information and communication technology. And what they're trying to do is what they've asserted is they're revisiting Darwinian evolution, and in light of intelligent design, and in light of these developments with nanotechnology and biotechnology and computing, and then understanding life, that the world, the universe is made up of information that exists whether or not we access it or not. It just is. The universe is information. Communication happens when information is shared from a transmitter to a receiver. But that information has to have a common language and coding. And whether that's two people talking and telling a story, whether that's, a root in a fungi in a chemical process underground, whether that's a DNA protein change, all of that is communication. But the trick is, if you get right down to it, the first communication can only happen if there's a third party involved who said, guys, this is what it means. When you see this is what it means. If you have no way of interpreting the information, there's no communication. So essentially, it is the case for God, that the case for a creator being in the universe, because the communication of the information cannot happen without the initial trigger to say that these are the rules of how it's communicated. So what it seems like, the end game is not simply just to capitalize and channel global capital through all of life on the planet and turn us all into data to make money and control us, but is ultimately to harness our life force through biosensor technology to extract enough data to break the code of life, to crack the code, and then in that attempt a coup of God. And in that become the supreme coder of the universe and rule the universe. And so the goal of their planetary computer, which Microsoft is developing, and this DNA barcode of life, is not simply what I thought, 4 or 5 months ago, which was to create these impact markets and to control people and to rule the earth, but is actually to break down what life itself is in a computational fashion, and in doing so, almost transform life into a substrate of computing systems through nanorobotics and nanoelectronics, and attempt this. Now, do I think that they can accomplish it? I don't really actually think they can, but I think that's what they would like to accomplish. And they even if they don't accomplish it, there's potential for grave harm to transform life on Earth into a synthetic replica that is mirrored in a metaverse, that is mirrored in a digital twin simulation, that is used to essentially run us through the simulation enough to jump us through the hoops to get the data, to fill in every bit of spackly open space, to fill it in and get that code broken.
So that you mentioned digital twins, digital twinning. What is that? Yes. What is that process, and what is that supposed to achieve?
Well, the other piece about, if you understand the logic of capital, right, that it must continue to grow. The capitalist paradigm is that it's continued growth. Now, we do live on a planet with finite resources. And while I do not buy into the financialization of nature, corporate climate aspect, it is true that we need to better care for the resources of this earth. We're being very disrespectful of the earth through extraction and global supply chains and all these things. But they want to keep their game of wealth and control and so on and so forth. And the next phase is that it goes digital. The growth, it's as if the capital is inverting into a simulation. And in the simulation, it can continue to grow. Now, there's still material elements in that growth. Like you have to, run the water to cool the server farms and the electricity and these things. It's not without environmental cost, but it's not an equivalency. And in many respects, what they're looking to do is to speed it all up. And the physics that are involved in global trade in digital goods, which is what blockchain was created to do. Blockchain was essentially about a ledger to track digital assets. Blockchain is the portal to the metaverse. Your digital ID and your digital wallet is the portal that connects your material self to your digital twin in the metaverse. It was to pull capitalism into that space. I mean, that's what blockchain is always meant to be. And to build out your digital twin, really. So that's my take, is that capitalism needs to invert, it needs to grow. And this is my strange experience of coming at all of this through education. They're training the children to live in the metaverse already. So like my child, when they were in elementary school, it was trendy to get like birthday gifts, these things called Webkinz, Webkinz. And you would get a stuffed animal and it would have a code, right? It wasn't a QR code then, it was a barcode, and you put in a number and it unlocked a digital replica of the Webkinz in the metaverse, right? It was all training. Like, who knew? We didn't have a language for it then. And then you could do digital work in the metaverse. You could mine gems. You could do games, and you would earn script. And then you could use this script, these points, this pseudo money, to build a replica world. You build a house for your thing. Like, you would build a yard. Depending on how much time you could spend. And I know, since it's expanded into many other gaming environments, Minecraft, Roblox, all of these other
Sims.
Yeah, and The Sims was very early. I think that was more adult. I mean, like not little kids. But
sure.
They're training the classrooms literally beyond, like that's an outside of a classroom thing, the stuffed animals, but they have this program called Class Dojo, which is framed as a communication device, a classroom behavior management tool, where children in public schools are assigned avatars, and I think they're like little monsters, and then you earn script by behaving properly, and then you can use that script to buy things like accessories for your avatar. But the parallel is that they're creating these non-fungible tokens for unique items for adults, right? Like for you can have an avatar and you can have a unique, outfit in the metaverse. And so that is this new economy that is unfolding, is a digital economy. And then what does a global supply chain look like for a Gucci handbag in the metaverse? It's a different supply chain. It's a fundamentally different idea of raw materials and processing and tracking and warehousing. It's different and it's faster. And so what's happened, this guy, Richard Baldwin, with, I think, the Graduate Institute of Geneva, he's an economist, he's one of the key people talking about the next phase of globalization 4.0, which is the move, not just the globalization, not only of material goods, but of service and knowledge work. And this is far beyond call centers or M-Turk work or platform labor. It is literally moving into blockchain digital items, but also remote robotic work and work by avatars. And that is what is coming. We're seeing this with Facebook and all these, put on your VR headset, put on your haptic suit. And then on blockchain, you can compete for jobs with everybody around the world for the lowest wages.
And you think that in this whole scenario, the push for the kids to learn coding, like there's this big thing like you teach your kids how to code with Harry Potter or whatever, is really to construct this virtual universe that all of this will exist in, right?
It has to code. Somebody has to build it.
Sure.
Like, that's the thing. If you understand it as manifest destiny, right? The empire, like a global imperial project. But unlike previous phases where you actually had to, like, you know, take your ships or your airplanes or your trains and your weapons and go claim it, this actually, you're building it. And you're you know, and the metaverse goes back to Neil Stephenson's book, Snow Crash, in 1992. So, and that's the thing that's really helped me a lot to think about it in the last 4 or 5 months, is trying to get a handle on nanotechnology and programming, because they're looking to program matter. And all of this has been in motion. Well, the early carbon nanotube construction, probably since the late 50s, but in high gear since the early 1990s. And I've done a talk about MITRE Corporation. So, you know, there are things that are 20 to 30 years well advanced that the general public has no idea even exist. And they don't even have the words to talk about it.
Sure.
And their children are being sold to make this, to scale these pilot programs to, and these are fundamentally, you know, I part of my key frame is that this is a military project. The metaverse is a fundamentally militarized space, and it is a space of psychological warfare. So
the metaverse that you're describing is the name of this virtual world that you're describing. Yeah.
Or the multiverse. Actually what and some of this, like, I will just say I'm not an expert, right? But I think my skill set is that if the people who are anointed as the experts stay in there, they just do one thing and they don't look at broadly. And so I'm not afraid to, like, have ideas about things. I could be wrong. I'd love to be wrong about a lot of these things. You know, I'm not,
exactly.
You know, I would love to, like, other than people say, it probably won't happen, or like, my motivations are good, blockchain is going to bring liberation, like, which I'm pretty convinced it's absolutely not. I'm willing to be wrong and interrogate some of these ideas. But so my sense is a lot of this also comes from the fact that my background is in cultural landscape. And I go places and I see things, and then I try to put the pieces together with what I see. So in January, I went to Salt Lake City. And Salt Lake City is a center for, it was one of the first nodes of the ARPANET. Actually, the ARPANET was, you know, sketched out on a napkin, you know, at Alta Ski Resort outside Salt Lake City. It has very deep ties to state intelligence. It has very deep ties to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and, you know, early, you know, biotechnology and ancestry.com. All of these things are in the mix in Salt Lake City. And actually at the University of Utah, which is based there, the first virtual item was developed in the 1970s. And it was a Melita teapot. And this guy, he sketched a Melita teapot that he got at the department store downtown. And then he translated, and there was something about I don't know how you say it, basal curves. There was something about the way in which the curve of this teapot and the handle and the proportion made it a perfect prototype to play with mathematically and from a three-dimensional spatial perspective. And so, so they made this virtual item, they sketched it, then they translated it into mathematical code, and then they put it into the digital space. And that was the first, and I think it was like a meme for a while, you know, like, you know, people would make referential jokes, insider jokes about the teapot. And so there's something in Salt Lake City called Silicon Slopes. And it's a whole area, and it's literally a stone's throw from Bluffdale, the NSA giant data center. It's right across the highway. And it's really been mostly developed out of nothing over the course of maybe 8 years. Just, there was nothing but orchards, and then all of a sudden, this very high-tech development is happening in greater Salt Lake City. Lehigh, I think, is where it is. And the first anchor tenant was Adobe. And I thought, And it's such that it's not a gated community, but there's sort of a ceremonial entrance into it. And you drive up sort of a low hill, and to get into it, you actually drive under the building. Like it's an arcade over the top of the roadway. So you're like processing through Adobe to get into Silicon Slopes. And I kept thinking, well, what's that all about? Because I think about Adobe as PDFs, right?
Yeah,
or like
exactly.
the things that I use at work. Like, how is it that they're such a big thing in this? Where does it fit in? And so the other thing that the University of Utah was really good at, beyond visual design, was file compression software. Now, if you're going to build a universe, and you're going to keep it going, it has to be pretty efficient. So you're not going to have, like, it's like us when you have like 60 tabs open on your bar. It's not terribly efficient, right? You need file compression and file open on command with permission, right? And so if you imagine the metaverse as being infinite files of experiences or spaces full of objects that are accessed when needed and then closed up and then opened over here and closed up, that's what your digital identity will do. And it's not unlike living in a gaming environment where you port to different parts of the world, and you can, maybe you port to your work in the morning and your avatar does work and that's what they're developing through this Japan Moonshot project, Cyborg Avatar Capitalism. But the file compression software of the metaverse, that's how I imagine it, is if like an infinite file cabinet and different people have access to different files. And you can maybe earn access. That's part of your script. You level up, and then if you level up, maybe you get to the top tier of the file cabinet. Some people never get off the bottom file cabinet, and they're just churning around in it. And I think that's what they're building, but it really runs on blockchain. And the blockchain fills out your twin. It fills out your avatar. It might track multiple identities over time, because I think within the physics of the metaverse is that you can exist as multiple avatars. And if you apply a capitalist logic to that, that would be desirable, because maybe they can only load up one avatar with so many NFT digital items. If you could fragment yourself into 10 different avatars, and then everybody could buy stuff or own stuff and trade money, it's ideal, really. So I don't know if that makes sense to you. That's how I've been thinking about it.
Sure. No. I mean, as much as I can grasp, it's a lot to take in for sure. But I think part of what fascinates me about all of this, and your research has done such a great job at pulling all of these seemingly disparate things together, is that a lot of this, the construction of this metaverse, has to do with the harvesting of all of these different kinds of data, and that can be Pokemon Go. That could be these things that seem so seemingly innocent, but they're actually kind of educating the AI that's going to run this whole thing, in a sense.
I know. I mean, that's what's so like, there's a video that I came across from MIT. Much of this stuff is incubated also at MIT Media Lab. And it's about cyborg botany, right? It's like a 3-minute clip about, turning plants essentially into computing systems. And I wasn't shocked, because early on in this, somehow I had stumbled across a request for proposals or information meeting for the U.S. Army for the Internet of Battlefield Things. So like and I lost the document and I can't find it, but it was like, if you're coming to the meeting to submit the proposal for the Internet of Battlefield Things, like, here's the bathrooms, here's where we have lunch. And by the way, like, here's a really nifty thing about how we're going to turn a rose into a transceiver, and like with wires. And isn't that fascinating? And I'm thinking, okay, so like, what does COINTELPRO look like? Like when you go to the park and the roses are wired to listen to you, like, and you don't even know if it's like, who's listening, right? Like, life is turned into a computational system, which is what the spatial web that is being built, this Web 3.0, is that living tissues become part of this ubiquitous, seamless computing system. And, at the time, that was really shocking to me. But then later, when I saw MIT going, oh, here, I'm going to put a potted plant by the door to my apartment so that if my cat runs out an open door, I'll get a notification on my computer from the plant that saw the cat run away. that something was going on. And, when I was looking at the rows, I thought, are they shoving wires up in that thing? Like, how exactly does that work? Because I wasn't familiar with nanotechnology. Or self-assembling nanoparticles. But really what they're doing is they're embedding in the tissues these particulates and tubes that are only visible under the electron microscope to turn them into little computers. I mean, that is their goal, and whether or not, like, how effective they're able to do at scaling that, but that's what they're working on. That's what they're pitching that they're going to be able to do, is to do that. So, oh gosh, I kind of lost my train of thought where I was going there, but like, that's where, like, so my frame in all of this, especially under the general pandemic narrative where people are fighting for freedom or certain rights or this sort of thing, is that, whoa. Like, you know what? It's not just about people here, guys. Like the synthetic biology program that is underway is about turning all of life into a machine to harvest this data and to get access to it. And so we need to stand with the bushes and the yeast and these other things that are being turned into bioreactors. And there's a company called Ginkgo Bioworks that's outside of Cambridge, surprise, surprise. And, they're programming yeast and programming bacteria and programming all sorts of things to turn living tissue into machines, literally, like engineered program machines. So that's that, to me, that is the frame. Like, if we understood what was at stake was that the entire world would be both turned into some sort of a life plus synthetic thing that was connected into a mechanical system, that was a militarized system that was mirroring us to extract all of our data to break the code of life, I think we could all be pretty unified that that's a bad plan. Like, to me, at this point, like, the COVID framing is harmful because we know it's not about that anymore. It was never about this one thing. It was about an ongoing process of advancing synthetic biology. And people are so stuck in their positions, including, like, my own family, like, they're not going to change. You can't convince them out of it. So, like, let's step back and reframe the whole thing. And the whole thing to me is we stand for natural life. We are keepers of life. And not just human life, but all of life is sort of where I'm at. The webs of relationship that are natural, that are mirrored on the mycelia, like the actual natural web and not web of relationships, which people really need to, stand down, because man's domination over nature has wrecked a lot of things. This Western Enlightenment scientism framing, I think, is the thing that we need to figure out how to heal. This thing that goes back to the Enlightenment and then back further, the Roman Empire, really.
Do you see all of this as an extension of that? Like, this is the ultimate control of all nature, like digitizing everything and then having this almost insidious microscopic level of control of everything, through this network of sensors and data harvesting and channeling people into certain outcomes. Yeah, no, I do. I mean, there's a short, like an 8-minute video called The Selfish Ledger, that was a thought experiment by Google Alphabet in 2016. And essentially what they're saying is that they're trying to get every bit of data to replicate everything. And so with 3D printing and automation and AI and global supply chains, that they would have a twin of you that they're essentially bringing into focus with increased granularity, right? So that you have a general vague outline, you have an armature, and then more and more detail fills it out so that it is more and more the real you. And so they will look and say, okay, what bit is missing here? What bit of data do we not yet have that we need? And then they will say, the AI will imagine, well, what device could we sell this person that would get that bit of data? And then we will figure out we will print it with our 3D printer, and then we will figure out, based on all your past history, what price you would pay for it and how to market it to you. And then we will get you to buy it and put it in your house so we can fill in that piece of you.
And then we've done that bit, then we'll do the next one and the next one and the next one. And so, and part of this, like in this video, it was talking about Lamarck, this Lamarckian epigenetics and the intelligent design. So, the most powerful people out there are revisiting everything about science we've been taught. And I think if one understands, occulted knowledge, not occult as in necessarily like magical, but hidden knowledge, the knowledge of the highest level scientists, the Jason scientists that is not going to show up in the peer-reviewed journals, that the public is not going to know about, that's not going to be in the New York Times, not going to be in Time magazine. There's the story that we are told, and then there's the other science that is happening at a higher level. And I think increasingly, if you understand it as information technology and code and frequency, that there are aspects of manipulation of living processes that very much have to do with light and energy and water. And so I think that, and this is something I've been looking into with my friend Steffers, who blogs at A Piece of Mindful, who does really, really important work on nanotech R&D, is looking at the hydrogen economy, looking at graphene, looking at how structured water systems and the use of ostensible nanotechnology and water management is going to come into play. And I think many people have been prepped for this idea of water wars, that this next century is going to be about control of water. But I think there are nuances to that story beyond simply, fracking, access, geoengineering, drought, that there are these other aspects potentially even of, beyond entertaining this idea of putting lithium in the water to control populations, but literally programming the structure of water molecules to certain ends to recreate living tissues to do what they want, to get the information that they want, and also to power the metaverse, because that is the other piece of the graphene equation, is that they're working on nanoelectronics and printing graphene in very flexible and cost-efficient ways, so that they can almost like wrap us inside and out with these films of graphene and harvest all of our little bits of nano bit of energy to, they say just power our phones or run our wearables, but it does feel like it's getting awfully close to the Matrix at this point. And again, you think of normalization. Like, I remember, my kid didn't have any, but the little kids where they would have the sneakers that would light up with the little sparkle lights when they stomped. And that is a piezoelectric, that's a visualization of piezoelectric energy. And what they are after is to recreate the built environment under sustainability, so that all of our sidewalks, all of our roads, all of our building materials, everything that we're physically interfacing with, we're generating energy to run the metaverse. And we are the green renewable energy. And and one of the things I will say, and people don't like me saying it, but because I always follow the money, is that RFK Jr. is a managing partner in Vantage Point Capital Partners, and they are a major green energies firm. And, I was looking at their portfolio early on, which was very deeply invested in fourth industrial revolution technologies. But at the time, I didn't have a good handle on batteries and the electrical aspect of it. And they've got a lot of holdings in that. So that's why it's very imperative that as we're going down this road, that we do not become limited by the frame that even the alt or the alt people want to offer you. You have to go really wide, because they want to keep you narrowly focused on certain elements, and then they can manage you in those channels. And I'm all over the place.
Yeah. Oh, thank goodness. Because this is all over the place. Speaking of energy, there's mental energy too, spiritual energy.
Yes.
And so do you think that things like science fiction movies, dystopic stories, are sort of priming us to sort of expect scenarios like this to take place?
Well, I would say, so this is like beyond, because there is a lot of the predictive programming stuff, and there are people who are far more knowledgeable about it than I am, because I'm not really great about watching a lot of popular stuff. The thing that I would like to add to this is that there's energy in, like, I mean, there's your own personal energy fields, there's energy with emotion, and that's why the frame I try to assert is that we're actually really powerful and that life is on our side, right?
Absolutely.
So if you understand, once you get a dip into nanotechnology and you imagine all of the things that are out there that we don't know about, that it's a yin yang. So there's probably an equal number of things we don't know about that are on the side of life. There's a lot of problematic things that are on the side of like the military, but there's also a lot of other stuff. So we may not know how to tap into that, but it's there. It doesn't mean it's not there.
Absolutely.
And so that's how I try to balance it. So I would say my sense is once you understand energy and frequency as part of this, and this is part of what's really interesting about Philadelphia is I think faith and spirit, however you practice it, as long as you don't hurt other people, that's sort of where I'm at. Like, don't keep your own house in order, don't hurt other people, and be spiritual. Whatever your practice is, and do it in an authentic way outside of corrupted institutions, all of whom are part of the social impact agenda. But it is the mystical experience. It is the mystics. And in Philadelphia in the 1690s, Johannes Kelpius came over, and he was a Silesian monk and an alchemist and a philosopher. And he was a protege of Jakob Zimmermann, who is connected to Daniel Boehme, like these German sort of mystics. And Zimmermann didn't make it over, he died, but Kelpius brought 40 monks, and they were coming to William Penn's woods, waiting for the woman of the wilderness from the book of Revelations. And they were on the 40th parallel, and they brought 40 monks, and they built this 40-foot square school and astronomy lab, and they did alchemy, and they chanted. And like one of the earliest hymnals in North America was, they printed it. And like one of the first portraits in North America was of Kelpius. It's a pretty crappy portrait, but like he was important enough. And like, so clearly it was a millenarian cult. The end of the world at that time did not actually happen. But there was something about a direct spiritual connection to the creative force. And their alchemy was alchemy of the soul. Not metals, it was alchemy of the spirit, and it was about song. So the music is something that has been fully suppressed throughout all of COVID. Don't use your voice, don't sing, it's dangerous. And I think that there's a very clear reason for that. So it's frequency, both vocal, prayer, and then I would say emotion, because the pineal gland is, there's huge issues with calcification, of the pineal with the fluoride and all that sort of thing. But in calcification, it becomes piezoelectric. So if you imagine calcifying your pineal gland so they can capture it for piezoelectric energy harvest and shock to one's emotional system. So if you imagine they're trying to digitally twin people, they've got scads of walking around Fitbit data, because tons of those, they've got scads of, I don't know, what is that, when you ride your bike around, right? Like the people rode their bike around the secret military bases, and they've got all the maps of where the secret military, because they wore their, map your My Ride, right? And so that data is pretty much out there. Calorie counter data, probably a lot of that. There's certain kinds of data that if they want to really this predator energy to replicate humanity, they need this wide spectrum of emotion, and they need to capture it. And so what they're working on with graphene as well is neural prosthetics to actually wrap thoughts in graphene. So they're working on the digital twin. They have a lot of certain kinds of data that, they've got masses of boring data, but they want interesting data, and they want your emotional data. So I've actually been in touch with several people who are targeted, identify as targeted individuals. And they've said that this targeting is connected with like UAV drones, and that it's worse when they're trying to go to sleep.
Interesting.
But we also are seeing lots of Internet of Things devices for sleep monitoring. Okay.
Yes.
And if you imagine that in sleep, your, spiritual essence, like sort of is in a different place than when you're waking up during the day, that element of it, sorry about that city noise, is very interesting. Like that they would want what it is to be human in REM sleep, in this out of body sort of experience. I think they also want a range of emotions. And so if what they're able to do is to create neural prosthetics that can cross the blood-brain barrier at a nano level and mirror strong emotion, that's feeding the system as well. And so I think they're working on creating these, and of course it's always dual use, so they frame it as people with neurological disorders or people with mental disorders, that's why they need these neuroprosthetics. But ultimately it's about gathering data, and Giordano, who's the bioethicist at Georgetown, like he talks about the dual use stuff all the time. So if you talk about media, so if they can set up that they can capture your emotional data, then the media's job is to walk you through your paces of all of these different experiences. And I would say beyond just the graphene neural prosthetics, there's also the virtual reality aspect. So they're pushing mixed reality and virtual reality in a really big way. And most people are not aware that the data capture is bidirectional. So you're experiencing a synthetic environment through the headset, but then the headset is also capturing your eye motion. They can get your circulation rate, your engagement with the material, and also a certain way they're capturing all of that. So what I'm very interested in is that these social impact markets in education, which is Sustainable Development Goal 4, they're pushing it in Africa and India especially. Because they want online education, which is cheap and crappy, but also collects a ton of data. They are working on pushing the education system not simply onto laptops, which are expensive, but onto phones and virtual reality headsets. And my sense is that people who are more connected to land and their lands and their environment and spiritual practice, and even the melanin and melatonin element of that, they want that. That is what they really want. I think they want the children of Africa and India to code the metaverse as a social impact deal. But I think they also want to harvest their spirituality and to further deconstruct the sacred connection of people to land that places in the global south that are less hooked into sort of the Western technology systems are, and to pull that in and to disconnect that. The largest blockchain identity pilot is in Ethiopia. I think that's no coincidence there that's happening there, and in partnership with Hanson Robotics with Sophia the robot. And so the pineal gland, actually, if you have blue light, which is the light off of screens and the light off of these VR headset, it suppresses melatonin, which activates the pineal gland in your spiritual seat. So if what you're imagining is that you're going to harness all of the children of Africa and India, as many as possible, and stick them on screens and in virtual reality headsets so that you can harvest their emotional, spiritual information, but also at the same time suppress their spiritual element through the blue light and through the diminishment of the melatonin, I think that is what's coming. And there's a paper called, I think, Raising the Consciousness of Children, and it's connected to the Lucis Trust through UNICEF. And the Lucis Trust is also the Lucifer Trust. Mm-hmm. And so, they in this paper, they talk about, there's a woman, Adele Diamond, who's at University of British Columbia, who's looking at neurocognition and executive function. So all of these ties fit together. It's both human capital finance, education, high technology, and then the technology is in and of itself like a predator energy that seeks to consume, as John Trudell said, the being part of human, and then subsume that in almost in a parasitic way, absorb it, and then make it grow it itself in this dark negative energy. That's a mechanical consciousness, really.
Yeah.
And they want the children. They want the children because they want the children to never know what it's like to actually live in the real world.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of education and the role of all this, my kids have gone to a Waldorf school, at least for the first 8 years of their schooling. So they're very sort of anti-technology, anti-media, at least, in moderation. And it's interesting because they have a totally different vibration about them than many of the kids that they know that haven't gone to that school. And they're not tuned in, like they're hip to advertising. They understand that those people are trying to sell you stuff that they don't need. So I feel like they really aren't hooked into that. They're not hooked into that machinery that is out to sort of hollow us out and kind of make us turn us into some strange appendage of this larger machine that I really don't understand. I mean, you could say money, you could say control, but to me, sometimes just hearing all of this, it seems like it's so much trouble to go to do this whole process. It makes me wonder what the real, ultra hyper motivation of this is and who the they is that I speak of and you speak of. And like, where does this all lead back to? Who's doing this? What's putting this into motion?
Well, I mean, I think it's all these levels. I mean, for me, if people are not familiar with John Trudell's works, he's since passed, but he was a leader of the American Indian movement. And so for me, a lot of this is about an animist worldview and right relationships and balance. And he did speak of this predator energy. And so I think in resistance spaces to all of the things that are happening, what they most want is to have people fragmented and to reinforce electoral politics or thought leaders or celebrities or certain things that will sort of peel people off of one another, or you apply an ism to it and then you'll say, well, that's not the ism I chose this other ism, and then everything splinters off. And I would say, if you imagine it as a predator energy, however you picture that or whatever label you would want to apply to it, that is this thing. How does it manifest? For me, early on, when people would say, well, who is the they? I would say, well, in terms of global social impact finance, you need to look at the Impact Management Project, because that is this 2,000 of the world's largest asset holders. Now, the they could very well be you if you have a pension, right? Because it's the imperative of capital to continue to recreate the game in order for it to continue. And the continuance is dependent on continued growth, which is antithetical to a cycle of life. Life is a circular system, and it doesn't just continue to grow. That's cancer, actually. So for it to grow, you end up with these abominations and perversions of, schizophrenic avatars and digital twins, because that's how that particular machine is running. So for me, the Impact Management Project was it for a while. And then, I was toying around with my friend Steffers, and we were like, well, maybe, Mr. Global or Mr. G is graphene. Like, maybe the Impact Management Project is actually working for graphene. Well, then who is graphene working for? And part of it is, if you imagine it as a system, and this is what I've spoken about a little bit with a friend lately, I'm playing it out in my head, but if what you have a presence that is trying to get off of the earth and use it as a launching point into the universe to get to the next point of domination. Like, I don't know if it's like a fungal spore, right? You're ready to pop and like go to the next place, but you've got to build up your energy store. Is that if you can capture and contain the energetic force and the spiritual force of most of the life on this planet, and throw everything so out of balance and into such a perversion that you like sort of implode it as you grow and explode yourself and like pop, like this, system into some other extraplanetary, and I'm not saying that's like an alien, but it's like an energetic force. If the energetic force has no respect for the earth itself in its present form and the beings that occupy the earth and our life and our individual agency and our networking to one another, there's no respect for that. Simply as energy to be harvested to a certain end, and the end would be to consume, to store power, to escape this into the next thing, to move on. And that's this manifest destiny. So on the one hand, you've got the inversion into the metaverse, and on the other hand, you've got the energy reserves to get off planet, which is kind of how I feel about it.
I remember why I originally brought up the Waldorf thing too, is because Rudolf Steiner, who set all those schools in motion in his philosophy, talked about this spirit named Ahriman. And Ahriman's job was to sort of trick everybody on Earth to think that all there was to life was material, was the physical, what you could measure and weigh and touch. And that kind of goes to Gnostic Christianity too, with the demiurge, who's also the same sort of thing, to trick you into thinking that material is all. And to me, that's like kind of that's what scientism is all about, is sort of this reductionist materialism, so that if you think that all there is to life is just what you can see and what you can receive through your senses, then that's kind of lackluster in a sense. I mean, don't get me wrong, the world is a beautiful place. People are fantastic to be around and to associate with. But if you think that there's nothing that you can't see, or, if there's nothing spiritual about what's going on, then then you don't even realize what really is on the menu. You think that the lines that you're supposed to be coloring in between are so narrow that you just don't even conceive of anything outside of big screen TVs and electronics and toys and just material goods. So I think that's a big hoodwink too, is reducing life to you were talking about like we're much more powerful than we think we are. I think that is one of the reasons we don't realize that, is because we think that all we are is just same shit, different day. We're just here to make money for a big boss, and I think that's such a short sell, like we're so much more than that. And I think this is a big trick. I mean, I don't think any of this can really work. We can't simulate people. We can't. I mean, it's just going to be that. It's going to be
you could do it for their game, right? Not really. I mean,
sure.
to the end that they want to use it. But it's just a shadow of the real thing. It's
Absolutely.
Not the real thing.
Yeah. That's why I don't get the whole transhumanist thing of, well, you will exist forever in like this robot body with a binary code version of yourself. And it's like, no, you won't. Like, you'll die, your soul will leave your body, and you'll just see this stupid little building with the hard drive containing a replica of you in it, and you'll go, what are you stupid idiot? Like, that's not me. That's some replica. So why, how to, it's such a big question. I don't know how to ask it. Why simulate everything? Why make a digital version of everything? Because there's money to be made off of that. There's energy to be harvested. What? Yeah.
Well, I mean, they need another economy.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then the next economy is the virtual economy. And then I think they want the data because they're trying to break this code. They think they can break a code. It's their quest, I guess. And I think they're deluded in their sense of power.
For sure.
That what do you want if you have all of the material things and you don't have the authentic spirit? I mean, I think if these were people who were in charge, who were coming from a place of spiritual maturity, they would not be attempting the things they're attempting. They would not be causing the harm they're causing. So I don't know where they went off the rails. I mean, they're all still somebody's kid. I keep hoping, at some point, that's why I keep saying like scrappy moms against AI. Like everybody's somebody's kid at some point. Like they were, they played in the mud and they did, they were naughty or they were good and it's not irredeemable. And that's the frame I'm trying to use in navigating all of the pandemic stuff, because I find if you imagine what is happening is about energy, for quite a good, like there's phases, but people who were questioning what was happening were becoming increasingly bitter and angry, and creating negative energy in and of themselves. And I'm not saying it's to be false positive, like just to be happy but the idea of reveling in other people's harm or it was upsetting to me to see people get in cycles of negativity that weren't going anywhere, because I said, I think this whole machine is run on spiritual energy. So how do we get in a place that we can both acknowledge the reality of what we're up against, but then somehow move beyond that? Or, and I came up with this idea of transmuting things, or working with, I've learned a lot, because I was not honestly a particularly spiritual person before all of this stuff happened. And so, I have a big learning curve, but how does you don't erase you can't erase information, you can't erase matter, but you can rebalance. So how do we rebalance this system? The system is profoundly out of balance. How do we transmute harm into something that is more, how do we neutralize things energetically? Because, it is this binary, positive, negative charge. How do we do that with our spirit? And, I don't know any of these things. I'm just making a lot of this stuff up as I go along. But the people who reached out to me early in this, for whom my research made a lot of sense, even though my research wasn't about health, were people in the holistic health space, people of faith, all kinds, and musicians. Right? Yeah. There were a ton of Waldorf people. There were a ton of Steiner people and anthroposophy people. And I didn't really, we have a Waldorf school here. And I knew a little bit, they do nice knitting and they don't use a lot of technology, and it's interesting. I didn't know a lot. I didn't really know about Steiner's philosophy. And so when I went to Salt Lake City, it was a woman who was the first Waldorf trained teacher in the state of Utah and was the only one for decades. Wow. So they got me, even though I didn't know it at the time, they knew. And so how do we come into this place of spirit? And, and I had a gift of spending some time the summer before this past one in South Dakota on Lakota land, and being in communion with a beautiful, powerful landscape, and just having a block of time to think and to be. And, that really centered, I think, for me, this idea of having a reckoning with Western Enlightenment thinkers. Sure. And having a reckoning with spirituality, and trying to figure out a new way forward that can rebalance. And what I came up with was these dandelions. And so I've been taking my dandelions to these places, because my skill set is cultural landscape. And I can tell, I'm not a great storyteller, but I know the history. And so I weave the history in with what's happening and try to do one of these rebalances. I don't know. I was just up at the lightning bolt sculpture on Labor Day. I went on Monday, and this is a sculpture that was designed by Isamu Noguchi in 1933, I believe, as part of a competition. It was never built until 1984, and it was towards the end of his life. And it's a bit of a cheesy sculpture, actually, but it's at the end of the Ben Franklin Bridge, which connects Philadelphia to Camden, New Jersey. And it's a pyramid. At the top of the pyramid is a key, and then the silver lightning bolt strikes the key, and at the very top there's a kite. So it's a representation, a pretty standard representation. But when I looked at that, I said, wow, that key is the public-private key of digital identity. That is blockchain identity, and the pyramid is the metaverse. Oh, wow. And what Richard Feynman said, who is the father of nanotechnology, is plenty of room at the bottom. And that's what the impactors investors say. There's plenty of profit at the bottom of the economic pyramid. So I'm standing in this, I'm like, I need to go to this pyramid. I've got this basket of dandelions that have been drying in my living room for months, and I need to do something, because that lightning bolt, it's nanoelectronics. Is actually a lot of the nanoelectronics are activated through frequency, whether it's light or ultrasound or electrical impulses. And so they're sandwiching this natural power of the lightning bolt, which also, the sculpture, has its own, free Masonic, esoteric elements in the pyramids and the keys. But it's sandwiching this natural system between these two man-made systems, right? And this sculpture is in the vicinity of the Federal Reserve and the Constitution Center and Independence Hall, and it's surrounded by traffic, so it's being powered and emphasized the energetic presence of this. And when it was built finally built in 1984. Wilson Goode was the mayor. He was the first black mayor of Philadelphia. And then literally 8 months later, in May of 1985, he dropped the bomb on MOVE in Philadelphia.
Oh, yeah.
So if you imagine the lightning bolts as bombs and directed energy weapons. So, yeah, so I just showed up and I tried to say, hey, I'm here by myself. I'm not hundreds of people, but I can tell the story. And part of the story was about Ben Franklin actually writing an essay in 1751 that informed Thomas Malthus that was really essentially about erasing people of color off the planet, or like anglicizing all of the United States and scouring the forests. And it wasn't good, right? And so part of it is this reckoning with what are the founding fathers really about? They were also mostly Freemasons and about taking other people's land. And that's a reckoning that has to happen if we're actually going to work our way through the other end. And I'm not saying this just to be woke or politically correct, but that was a harm that was done because of a misalignment of how people thought about it, a force of domination that was laying itself on the culture and the land and the beings, and it never got made right. So anyway, I dropped some dandelions on that, and I hope I made it a little bit right on Monday.
Well, that also brings to light, too, there is definitely a eugenics aspect to all this, right?
Well, I would say it is eugenics, but it's actually different than a lot of people think. So I think on the one hand, there is an element of controlled reproduction is part of that. So that's eugenics. I think a lot of people are also thinking about imagining what eugenics was, say, under the Nazi regime, right? That you are looking for the Übermensch, the powerful, blonde, Nordic. But eugenics for a post-human world is a different thing. They don't actually, the powers that be are not looking for an idealized human in the form that it took, 80 years ago. I think ultimately they're working towards a post-human paradigm. And so what does that eugenics look like? And that's the conversation I'm trying to sort of shift, is to say we need to be more nuanced. We need to understand what we're actually talking about when we talk about eugenics, because and that we also need to own that the eugenics agenda is homegrown, that it's not just the Nazis, it's Cold Spring Harbor out on Long Island. And a lot of that work is grounded in, harms that were done in terms of erasure of indigenous people and that sort of thing, those practices of reproduction control and management that go way back. So I think a lot of people sort of frame it as eugenics and, Francis Galton, or in the United Kingdom, or in the Nazis, but we actually have our own really deep history with that as well. So
there's that.
There's that. I know, right? It's so complicated because there's so much they don't teach you.
Yeah,
and unless you stumble into it, I had the chance to meet people who my frame as, a progressive, liberal, NPR listening woman about choice and reproductive control. I never really understood about them testing the pill in Puerto Rico and giving 8-year-old girls periods, experimenting on them with the hormones in milk, right? Or control of indigenous women and black women and, disabled women, and having, their access to reproduction cut off. And so it's a much more sophisticated conversation that we actually have to have. And when we're, especially in this moment where the key element is engaging with the idea of synthetic biology and human computing systems, and as they even call them, centaurs, rights to reproduction, that's a huge part. It's a huge part of the conversation.
Well, and speaking of that, the liberal aspect of it too, especially when you think of the Great Reset, Fourth Industrial Revolution sort of stuff, it's kind of a wolf in liberals' clothing in a sense. It's explained to us everything's going to be equal. None of us will own our stuff, and we'll all be on the same playing field. But that's not what it is at all. It's,
Some people will own all the stuff. People will own all the stuff, and it'll probably be a decentralized autonomous organization run by AI eventually. They'll get rid of all the people, and it'll just be run on equations.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I mean, but see, for me, because I was coming from, like, I was liberal, and then I, like, did more activism, like, oh, okay, left, it must be left, and then, like, the pandemic hit, and I said, where are all y'all? Like,
exactly.
Like, I thought, like, we were on the right page, but then once I waded in, I was like, okay, so, you know, and I came into, like, left-leaning thought more from, like, a community reading group that was framed around Black radical, like, political education. So not Marxism, but more Du Bois, right? And Baldwin and that framing. And so it was a little bit, I was late to the game, and my entry point was different than most people's. But I was like, okay, where are all of y'all? No, you're not here. Okay, so now what? I guess I'm like I'm homeless at this point. Like, don't dominate people. Like, but then I realized that the social impact agenda largely emerged out of, like, the Fabian Society, that the London School of Economics is central to the creation of these pay for success and social impact bonds. And so there's a whole lot of leftist eugenics too, right? Because it was a classist frame. And once I understood about the Fabians, I said, oh, okay, that's what I was missing, is that it's not actually, I didn't have the full picture. And then the other element of the left is that I think there's a sense of technological supremacy and somewhat of a derision around an engineered society, and not a high level of respect for spirituality. Right. And I think within the framing and knowing the long trajectory of this, and I know in the education space, the trajectory, you know, well, I guess it's always been the Prussian model, but even through the technological piece since the 90s, it's a long lead time. And if you imagine the last, 20 to 30 years has been essentially framing people who have a faith practice as ignorant or dumb or misguided, or having there's a certain framing that has been used in a very intentional way, I think, to marginalize people who ground their moral principled positions from a faith practice, however that manifests. They're either terrorists, they're white supremacists, they're, and as someone who wasn't coming, I mean, I'm a WASP, but not a big practicing one. That was not my experience with most of the people that I have engaged with at this point. Like, I would have a much harder time with the people that I thought I would be aligned with than other people. And I don't pull punches when I, put out on Twitter or speak to people. I always tell the same story, because I'm speaking what I feel is the truth as much as I know it now. And I'm willing to readjust and deepen and edit as I go along and I get new information. But I don't edit my talks depending on who the audience is. I figure everybody's a grown-up and they should be able to take it.
Exactly.
And if it doesn't resonate, then that's okay. The way I think about the world isn't how everybody thinks about the world. So I can't remember exactly where we were going with that, but that's sort of how I'm at this, the liberal left, the spiritual. And I will say, one of the things that my background is cultural landscape and art history. And so I've actually had and you mentioned Sophia and the demiurge. So I have in my social media feed, maybe 3 weeks ago or so, there was an image of someone who was in Detroit at the Detroit Institute of Art. And there's a room in that space that was redone by Diego Rivera, the Mexican muralist, in 1932, I think, 32, 33. And he was brought in by Edsel Ford and the Ford, who created the Ford Foundation. And they remade this whole garden room with fresco murals, like a whole series, the whole room with panels of different scales. That was essentially celebrating the Ford plant, the Rouge factory that took everything from like iron ore all the way to the finished Ford car. And it was like the power of the worker, and the technology was going to be amazing, and it was, but in this grand view, like there were big set panels and smaller panels. There was a small panel of vaccination. I thought, whoa, that's kind of crazy. Like, how did that get in there? Right. And it wasn't the biggest panel, but it's a pretty sized panel. And there's a story behind it that evidently it was framed as a nativity. So there's like the Mary and Joseph figure and the baby, and the babies being or toddlerish being injected, and then there's animals in the foreground, which are the animals that the serums were made out of, and in the background there are these scientists with like crazy light. I don't know if it was like a furnace or something, and then you read more about this. The origins of this painting, and they toured a pharmaceutical company. They came and they spent 6 months studying all of the Ford, but they toured this, and I don't remember the name of the pharmaceutical company in Detroit, but these companies, I mean, it's no big surprise, but they were selling a lot of cocaine, in the 1910s, and then like in the here's your needle, you can self-administer your cocaine, and then Aleister Crowley actually had met up with this company in 1914 to talk about peyote. So like this company had an interesting history. So They toured this company like, this is amazing. And I think it was like the polio vaccine. So we're going to put a vaccine panel in here. And we're going to make it like a nativity. It was very controversial. And the Mary figure is modeled the face on Jean Harlow, the movie star. And like the Joseph was the museum director. And then the baby was the Lindbergh baby. Like
weird.
It's very strange, but and you have to look it up. But then underneath was a much smaller panel that was part of a frieze, very abstract. And I asked people on social media, I said, "What do you think this is? This is a really strange image." And it was sort of a blob, abstracted with different light tones, and they were like, "It's the demiurge." It's the demiurge. And then on the one side are like the good forces, on the bad side is the dark forces, and the demiurge blobby thing is right in the middle under the vaccination program.
Weird.
So I kind of started digging into going, like it's kind of again with the left, like I thought Diego Rivera was this, but it turns out like his work was in the San Francisco Stock Exchange, and like he was doing works for the Rockefeller. Like he got kicked out, but he was doing these jobs for these major capitalists at the time. So I'm like, well, maybe he's not what I thought. And I put that out, and then someone sent me a Twitter link to another Mexican muralist. There were these like 3 or 4 key people in the 30s, and I'm trying to remember. I might say it wrong. I can't remember if it's Jose or Juan. I think it's Jose Clemente Orozco. And he had a much more skeptical view of technology. And he had done a whole series of murals at Dartmouth Library, again in 1932 to 33, during the total colonial revival era in New England. And they brought him in, and he created a wall of murals, like 3,600 square feet of murals, of the American civilization, the epic of American civilization that was centering Mesoamerica and Cortez and the indigenous people, and this ups and downs of civilization and how it progressed. And then, but he later did in Mexico a whole 57 murals in this orphanage, this Hospicio Cabañas, I think, an 18th century, that's a UNESCO heritage site, which has all of this technology and dark angels and Cortez, like dark angels whispering in his ear that are made like robot angels.
Wow.
And it's crazy. And this was the library room for these orphans in this 18th century hospital.
Wow.
And so there's this tension even within the left, like going back to the 30s, around what is the role of technology and progress. And on the one hand, like I want to have a bigger discussion. I have a friend that we want to do a podcast and interrogate this, of these different worldviews of asserting like technology in the hands of the workers is somehow going to be good. But then this other viewpoint is like, wait a minute, this was never going to be good. This is going against natural systems entirely, and it can never be made right. And so anyway, it's an interesting balance. So I would encourage people to go look up Diego Rivera's vaccination painting in the Detroit Institute of Art. It's
very interesting. Well, going back a little bit to graphene.
Yeah.
The ubiquitous graphene. Is that the same substance that somebody, I forget where she was from, maybe she was a former Pfizer board member or something like that, admitted that was that the ingredient that was included in the vaccine, the COVID vaccine? Am I correct?
So my friend Steffers has been doing a lot of work on graphene for at least 3 or 4 months. And the history of graphene, and I'm trying to remember the woman's name, and it kills me that I can't remember it. Maybe we can link to it later. But this woman who was the first female tenured professor at MIT was working on carbon nanotechnology and likely graphene as far back as the late 1950s. So the story of in 2004, I think it was, these 2 guys at Manchester discovered it with tape and a pencil. I think is a lot of times there are these mythical stories that are trotted out to sell, but it's very likely that the structure of carbon nano machines and that technology was happening for 4 or 5 decades in advance of the public unveiling of this technology. And then later they won the Nobel Prize. And then we're going on close to 20 years of them working. Graphene is it's the world's first 2-dimensional material. So they are making other 2-dimensional materials, but because of its hexagonal shape, it's incredibly strong and flexible, and that they can layer it and twist it and add other materials to it to have it do all sorts of amazing things. There's a professor, his name is last name is Schwartz, I think, at McGill, and when the Canadian health system pulled the masks off the market that they had been giving to children in schools because they had graphene, he rushed in to say, "Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's the wonder material. It's the most amazing thing." You remember the scene in The Graduate when Ben is pulled aside and said, "Young man, the future is plastic. The future is plastic." And they said, if they made this movie today, it would be the future is graphene. Everything is graphene. And if you understand that the metaverse is 2-dimensional, it's actually flattening the world into it. It's pulling us into the metaverse. And so instead of going, 3, 4, 5D, becoming more, it's a reductive policy of scrunching real life into a 2-dimensional space that is more easily contained and managed. And I have friends who are, very good at math, and I'm not good at math, but they say, the math of 2 dimensions is a lot easier than the math of 3 dimensions, right? And so if they can turn life into something that's mostly 2-dimensional, the graphene agenda fits into that really well. So yeah, all you have to do is start doing online searches. I would guarantee you could almost pick any word and put graphene in it, and something would come up. I mean, they want to inject it in watermelons. They want to put it in bicycles. They want to put it in tennis rackets. And if you put graphene in adjuvant, you will see many, many papers about it being used as an adjuvant in injections. Now, the thing about this whole global health scenario is that we get back to me, the germ theory, terrain theory. And once you start to look at the massive upscaling and fabrication of nanotechnology and nanoparticulates, there are all sorts of, it's an environmental toxin. A lot of the papers, not just of graphene, but other nanoparticulates, is they talk about cytotoxicity. How much can they get into you before your tissues start to deteriorate and fall apart? And you can't see it. I mean, there were some people who would say, "Oh, look, there's 90% graphene. If that were true, it would be black." No, that's about the light refraction and the electron microscope. And if you understand nanotechnology, you can't see it with the naked eye. So no, it wouldn't be black. So we've got an invisible thing that we're up against, right? And whether that thing is a virus or nanotechnology, ultimately, it's the people who are running the electron microscopes are the ones who get to call it, right? Because regular people are not allowed to look in the electron microscopes, and we wouldn't know what we were looking at anyway. So if you can create a perpetrator that only the rich people who are credentialed can actually engage in the conversation, that's a problem. And that is why, the quinta columna that they did, the electron microscopy work was so important, because most people who have the credentials to look in the electron microscope have no incentive to actually expose things that are problematic. I would say, aside from whatever those particular findings were, all you have to start doing is to look into the uses of graphene in biomedical research, to look at cytotoxicity, to look at the use of this material in all sorts of electronics and consumer products and food products and wrapping and everything. Like literally, there's a guy, James Tour at Rice University in Houston. He has developed, the challenge with graphene is to get it produced at scale. It's very expensive, and to have it produced in a consistent format. What they've developed is a way of using a laser to turn anything that is carbon into graphene. With directed lasers. And so they're saying, and it's electronics. So they're saying we can laser a potato, we can laser a coconut, we can laser anything, and then we can use it as an electronic and it will be edible. Isn't that wonderful? And we can also laser plastic film, which is big oil, and we can coat it and we can turn it into wearable electronics. So the graphene element to this is hugely important because they are looking to graphenate the world, really. And it's not simply about having it injected into our bodies. It is about immersing our entire environmental biological systems on the outside. And so people who sort of wag fingers at people who have been injected, I would say, hey guys, you're swimming in nanoparticulates already. Now, it may be a sense of scale, but we have to actually all stand together in the face of the nanotechnology, synthetic biology agenda, because none of us are going to be able to step out of it. Even if you have your own independent community with your own independent economic system and your own food sources, once this stuff is in the water cycle, which they're using graphene for water processing, we're all in it, right? Like we're made of water, it's in the water cycle, it's in the air systems, they're putting it in the soil, and you can't see it. So there's no way that you can just escape all of this. So to me, that's my principal position, is that we actually have to interrogate what is actually going on, as the new war on life is a war of nanotechnology, and it's largely an invisible war, which is really hard.
And do you think that it's manipulatable? It's up for a hard reason. For some reason, I'm having a hard time getting that word out, but you know what word I mean.
Yeah.
By something like 5G. I've heard that connection, or connections between other things that are supposedly in these COVID vaccines and 5G. And I was very critical of that for a while, but I've heard stuff recently that has convinced me more that there is some sort of a connection between those two things.
Well, all of the small cell technology, the resonance between the biosensors, the creation of the ubiquitous computing of the spatial web runs on the telecom industry. So the metaverse exists both in a gaming environment that is strictly digital, but then it also exists in mixed reality, which means when you go out into your physical material world, it's overlaid with information, right? Like there would be information overlaid on the, I don't know, you could walk out of your house in your virtual reality glasses and say, that white car out there across the street, it has 3 recall codes on it, right? Or this other person is illegally parked, they have $800 in parking tickets. Or it's a fusion, it's a cyber-physical fusion that is happening. And that all runs on the telecom. So it's not just 5G. I mean, 6G is for the robot-to-robot communication and the digital twinning. And then there's 7Gs and many other Gs. So I would encourage people to look up the Japan Moonshot Project. That is by the Japan Science and Technology Agency. Essentially goal 1 is that by 2050, we exist outside of a physical body and mind in time and space, which is crazy, but that's what they imagine. It's this porting. And they're framing it as diversity and inclusion. And that's the part that's really hard. And I have, a friend who is an expat who lives in Tokyo, who went with his toddler and took dandelions to the lobby of the Moonshot Project. It's on my website, and said, no, nice. We refuse this. I'm not doing this for my 3-year-old. I'm not. And then he interwove it with some beautiful footage of the kids pulling carrots and, in a garden. But it's real. I'm not making this up. And so NT&T, Nippon Telegraph and Telephone, is a partner in that. And they have several white papers on 6G and digital twinning from March of this year that lay it out very clearly what their intentions are. So can they scale it? Can they actually accomplish it? I don't know. If you look at the nanotechnology papers, Japan is very far advanced. Japan and Germany are very high up there, and then followed by the US, and then, China and Latin America. So yeah, there's a lot people don't know about what's actually happening about the world. And we're living in different realities. And that's the thing I struggle with, is that the learning curve is so steep. And to know this makes you realize that, I don't know, it's that most of the institutions that you are taught to trust, that trust has been betrayed in large part. And I think oftentimes that betrayal has not necessarily, for most people, been intentional, but has been because of how we've structured society in these silos, and how we've rewarded compliance and rewarded both from social and monetary things to not look broadly and not ask questions, and that we've conditioned the world to be that, for several generations. And so we've ended up at a place where unintentionally people are unleashing something that is almost unimaginable, that is about to erase life as we know it on this planet.
You mentioned earlier,
and they're not doing it because they're mean people. Like, I have people who are credentialed. I mean, I have a master's degree in cultural landscape, and I don't have a particular skill set, but I can look and say, this is how I think this thing is working. We should ask, we should have consensus, we should be interrogating. And there are people with much more credentialed in many of these areas who it never occurred to that that's what was happening, whether their areas finance or technology or social policy, because they never looked at any of the other stuff. And I would say largely in academia, what's happening is that it's all self-referential and people are performing for other academics. So they never bothered to read Nippon Telegraph and Telephone's white paper. You don't have to be a super smart, intelligent person to do that reading. It's, probably, a high school kid could read it and get what they're saying. It's not really that complicated. Maybe I wouldn't know the math equations, but I can read what they're saying. They're saying that we're going to live outside of a body and mind, and that's what they want the children to normalize that. Then we should all talk about it. And the people who are leaders in faith communities should talk about it. Because I would say, for the most part, it's an abomination is playing God. And most faith practices, you don't do that. You don't go there, whatever it is. But the thing is that though the heads of those institutions have been pulled into these social impact finance programs and rewarded with, money and, stroked and told they're wonderful and that's something that's very central to Philadelphia. We have a lot of interfaith groups who are all about social justice, where if I told them what was really happening, and I actually, right before the pandemic in late February of last year, I was invited to speak at a Unitarian church. They've got the Black Lives Matter banners and they've got their rainbows and they've got all this stuff. And I said, well, the thing is, with this social impact finance, you could be investing your, church endowment in pre-K, but nobody's telling you that they put the kids of North Tulsa in the 100th anniversary after the race massacre on surveillance play tables to get a nice return. It said it's not enough to just put your money in there and presume that because you're providing childcare that you're good people, because you're not. I'm here to tell you that this is a problem. These kids are literally being scored on their social behaviors according to the Heckman equation. So these investors can make their 7 to 12% profit, and they're going to slap Fitbits on the kids to make sure they get it to 12% with the health data. So you have to ask about it, and it's connected to the United Way, and it's connected to elite people in your community, all of whom you think are great. And the pastor was really pissed off at me. He's like, "You're talking about my friends." And I said, well, then you need to ask them about this, because I'm here to show up to say, you no longer have plausible deniability. I told you about the Hatch We Play Smart play tables, so go find out.
Yeah, do your own research.
You can't be ignorant about it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is also a very strange time to be grappling with all this too, especially in the public, like you do on your Twitter feed, for instance, because there's such a stigmatized aura around anybody who questions any sort of narrative that we're supposed to be buying without even thinking twice about it. So you must get labeled as a conspiracy theorist all the time, for you, not only are you questioning a narrative, you're questioning capital T, capital N, the narrative, like the biggest narrative you could ever imagine. So are you getting...
The only people that get angry with me are the blockchain people.
Oh, wow.
People don't
Go
really
figure.
know me. Like, I mean, that's the thing, that it's my position. And then I do block people, like, because, like, honestly, I'm not here to convince everybody. So if we're not agreeing, like, that's just, those people are annoying, like, they don't like me. But I don't get trolled, really. I don't, like, people, because the thing is, like, I know the stuff. And I don't really argue I don't argue things I don't know. So, the medical stuff, like, I mean, I have weighed in because I think more and more likely, I feel like what is emerging is a terrain issue, is an issue around mass planned, intentional environmental toxicity and poisoning through electrical systems and through the nanoelectronics. And literally them saying that their plan is a human plus transhumanist new version of life on Earth. And it's crazy to me that we're not all talking about that, like that this could be advancing, in whatever forms, and not just about injections, about all sorts of other things. And it's advancing, and that no one's actually questioning, do we want to be a centaur or a cyborg or be on a continuum of soft robotics? And what the meaning of that is for the children. But yeah, people don't really give me a hard time. And the funny thing is that, like, if you look, like, I never knew, like, for 4 or 5 years, I had 300 followers, right? Like, nobody was paying attention to me when I was doing school stuff. And now it's really big, and it's every kind of person you could imagine. And because I don't know, like, and who knows how many are actually people. Some of them are probably just bots or whatever. But I think people want to know. I think there is a curiosity about thinking about new material. And that's why I try to stay out of the ruts of sort of even the alt narrative around COVID, because there's this well-worn path, or a couple of well-worn paths. And I think that our collective consciousness is better served, at least by some of the people being on the outside, throwing out other random things to, like, think about this, how does this, because then it gives you a new lens to look at the other narratives that are unfolding. I get really tired about just having the same. I'd much rather, I think I said I would rather talk about art than electoral politics, or maybe also the mainstream COVID narrative. Like, at this point, we've got to, I mean, I'm not saying it's not relevant, but if we're not integrating it into the next phase of globalization and transhumanism and, biosensor data, then it's not really gonna, we're not gonna get there, folks.
Sure. What was I going to say? Oh, yes, the term gamification. You mentioned having a friend earlier who was a game programmer, and I believe it's the same person that, if I remember correctly, that you did a presentation with. There's a presentation on YouTube that you did. It's probably 2.5 hours long or something like that. Yeah. So what is the gamification of reality, and how does it play into all? Why games? Why put it into that framework? Because it sounds kind of innocent.
Oh, yeah, I know. Well, when I was doing education work, it was all about gamifying education. And I didn't have a good sense of it at the time, that it was. So one, I mean, the video games are the metaverse. And so once you're operating in a gaming environment, you didn't design it. Unless, like, rarely you're the game designer. So you're operating in somebody else's world, which they control and you don't. So if you're understanding this from a terms of power and domination, that's optimal. If you're operating in the real world, all sorts of random things can happen in the real world. In the programmed world, only the things that are programmed into that world can happen there. And so one of the key entities in all of this stuff that is unfolding is Wharton Business School, which is the business school at the University of Pennsylvania, where I am in Philly. Judith Wharton was the former head of Penn, and she left to become the head of the Rockefeller Foundation, and they set up all the impact investing and everything. So we're very baked in, both the Penn health system and Wharton and the social policy practice at Penn into the system. So, but there's a professor at Wharton, his name is Kevin Wehrback, and he was very central to sort of the early telecom industry, and his specialty is equal in gamification and blockchain, because the blockchain is central to the gaming economies. And so one of the talks he gave, and you can watch it, but it was like ostensibly given to like Wharton grads, right? But it's not paywalled. But he said, okay, so there are lots of games out there. Sometimes you don't even know you're in a game, right? And sometimes, you don't know all the rules, or the rules are unexpected. So optimally, you should be the one designing the game. Like, that's what Kevin Werbach has said to the Wharton people, like the people who paid the big bucks. Be the one who codes the game. Because sometimes there's a game going on and the people are clueless, or even the game is playing. Or sometimes they're playing the game, but you make up the rules and you don't tell them all the rules. And so, and that's the power dynamic. So the other piece of it is that within the financial markets and hedge funds and shorting, game theory is central to all of that. It's about calculating risk and also behavioral economics and nudging and shifting behaviors and choice theory, which are built into economics. And so this is all in the mix of games, is collection of data and choice and shaping and guessing, and then in deciding and getting granular data to make the best guess. That within financial markets on the gaming is that there are side bets happening. So you're playing the game and someone's maybe betting on who's going to do well in the game, and there are these side bets placed, and then some of the bets are placed that you're going to prevail or win at the game, and some people are betting that you lose at the game. And so if you imagine that what they're pushing us into is this game of life in a mixed reality where we're throwing off real-time data all the time, and it's connected to global, well, I call it signals intelligence, both for military planning and risk profiling and financial profiling. You're throwing off all of this real-time data analytics, and then people are deciding about shorting you, or shorting your prospects, or thinking that you'll and then, but a smart environment is built into the game. The smart environment of sensors based on, does your QR code work to get into the laundromat or to get on the bus, and then the system can start messing with you in the smart environment. And sometimes you're out in the world and you're like, geez, like this is a terrible day. Nothing's going right for me. But now in a world of ubiquitous computing, you don't know if it's because like you're just normally having a normal bad day, or like somebody's in the metaverse poking you and making sure you don't get to where you need to go on time. So this is all part of the game. It's to me, it's signals intelligence. It's these financial markets. It's manipulating behavior, and a lot of it is competition, because these people are crazy about getting everyone to compete with one another on leaderboards. So you have your digital identity, you have your avatar, you have this game board, that says how you're doing and rating against every other person as you compete to do your haptic robotic work in your factory on the other side of the world. And it's all a game, because if they didn't make it, if they didn't build in these rules, it would just be even more soul sucking than it already is. So I think that's all part of the game. The other thing is okay, so that's three things. It's the financial markets, it's military, state intelligence risk assessment, and then it's to teach the AI. Because I think the gaming, also, we have to understand that all of the activity in the metaverse is ultimately to fill in the cracks, to teach the AI enough data to break the code. So I think it's all those three things.
Interesting and strange. Well, I'm going to just kind of jump to a completely different subject, just because we're kind of rounding in on 2 hours. But it's something that was brought up in another, I don't know whether it was an interview or a presentation that you did, but it has to do with the COVID situation, the lockdowns and stuff like that. Do you think it's a coincidence that the 10 digital nations are some of the ones, like the ones that they're really doing these kind of hardcore experiments with, are the ones experiencing the most oppressive of the COVID lockdowns? Do you think there's some connection between those two things?
Well, it's a mix, I would say. Because I'm pretty sure, it's been a while since I remember all 10, but like South Korea is in there, and I don't think you hear a lot about South Korea, and I don't know about I think Estonia is in there too, and I don't think you hear a lot about things being terrible in Estonia. So I think, to me, it's some of it is about colonization. Like, I had my eye on Australia as being an early pilot for smart social impact bonds on blockchain, based on the World Bank is developing so that these social impact bond instruments that will be put on blockchain so that they can become more liquid and tradable. And they have something called the Bond Eye, which is they were doing in partnership with Commonwealth Bank. And I can't remember exactly what the focus of that particular bond was. It might have been a green bond or a sustainability bond. But within the human capital space, once you understand that educational technology is not simply about selling computers or software, cloud servers, or doing human capital bets, but is actually about mirroring digital twins to, break the code, and that's what they're using the children for at all of those levels. There was something called a progressive educational enterprise called Big Picture Learning. And Big Picture Learning came out of Rhode Island and was funded by Gates as part of his Small Schools initiative. And it was run in partnership with Brown University. And I'm trying to remember the guy who was a thought leader for it, but he was a leader in super progressive education, right? And so they would pitch this school that most of the time you wouldn't be in school, and you would be doing like work-based learning or following your passion. And so it was like, you would all the kids were going to be recording artists or something. They would pick some flashy, great thing. But in reality, if you understood it from a privatization standpoint, you would say, okay, the kids are only in school 2 days a week. So then we can double up on school buildings and close half the school buildings and then get unpaid labor, and the kids are out in the workforce, and, and possibly the kids are being groomed or racially profiled or whatever, because who's protecting them in work-based learning environments? But then eventually it won't even be in an office, because you'll be in a haptic suit, right? And they'll be doing online, maybe everybody gets to be a recording artist if you get to do it in the metaverse, right? Because there's unlimited numbers of recording studios you could put on in your VR headset. For sure. And I wasn't there at the time. But so Big Picture Learning is central, and it started in Rhode Island, and it franchised. And like our school district, which is super poor, gave them $23 million in one of the schools they had closed. And this school became a hub for financial inclusion services and like health consulting services. And it was like this one-stop shop for every neoliberal social like program that you could do, piggybacked onto Big Picture Learning. Well, then it spun off into like a dozen different countries, including Australia. And the area of Australia was the same place that they were doing social impact bonds and digital driver's licenses and Commonwealth Bank. And I was like, that's... And then it turns out in the UK, the first social impact bond for education was in Doncaster, and it was work-based learning with Big Picture. So I'm like, okay, so Big Picture is doing the social impact bonds in England. They're also in Australia. The World Bank Smart Blockchain Impact Bond is in Australia. I'm like, I'm betting these human capital bonds are going to be wrapped into progressive, online, digital, project-based learning in Australia, and getting all this data. And then boom, pandemic happened. And so that blew that all out of the water, which doesn't mean that it's not still in the works, because a lot of the people who are following the general narrative are imagining that somehow like Texas and Florida are safe and they're going to go there and escape this thing, but they don't realize it's about digital driver's licenses and digital credentials, which Texas and Florida are a hotbed for both. So they're coming at you from all of these different ways, and then they're running the narrative, and they're getting everybody in the position they want them in. But ultimately, it's about getting the key, right, under the lightning bolt, the key to the digital identity, to your umbilicus to the metaverse, and they're going to get you however they can get you. I mean, they do ultimately really want the biosensor part, so the health part isn't insubstantial, but it's not the only way in.
Well, to draw this to a close, I mean, there's no real good place. We could go on for hours, and we should definitely do a second part to this for sure. I just have time constraints tonight, but you seem like such an optimistic person. You're smiling throughout all of this while delivering these bleak...
People hate that. Some people are really
No.
like, how can you do? They're smiling at our pain, and I'm like,
No, I think it's fantastic. I mean, you have somebody like Mark Passio who also has a lot of, a different sort of information, but he's like shouting it from a podium, and it makes you feel horrible. It like makes you feel tainted after listening to it. But this, how do you maintain that optimism, and how do you stay sane knowing all of this stuff, doing all the research into all of this, and realizing that this may be what is in store for us, whether it actually manifests or not?
Well, once you know about the nanotechnology and like the laws of physics don't apply at that level, and that it's spiritual and energetic, I feel like we have lots of tools we don't even know about, right? And this thing is so complicated. There's an awful lot of things that all have to go right for them to actually be able to pull it off.
For sure.
And nobody wants this. I would say there's maybe like a tiny fraction of a percent of like sociopathic people who actually would want the kind of world that they're building if they knew. And in doing this and stepping out on this road, I have found so many amazing people, and I've been able to shed ideas that I had and grow in new ways. Like, I keep saying like, this wasn't the midlife crisis I thought I was going to have, or I could be like, how do I spend my 50s? I could like remodel my bathroom, or I could try to save the universe. Like, this actually matters, right?
For
How
sure.
weird it is that we showed up, and people's principal positions matter. Now, what they most want, the powers that be, and, I talk about this a little bit, is that, Oracle is a big piece of this. Salesforce is a big piece of this. And so, Larry Ellison and Mark Benioff are these players, and Ellison had, told Benioff to read The Art of War. And Benioff's like, yeah, bring your aggression. Like, I want it. I love this stuff. And I think in some ways, these energetic systems feed off of negative, chaotic energy, which I think sometimes, and I'm not saying it's not reasonable, but that we get stuck in the negative stuff.
For sure.
Or the angry stuff, which is, again, it's all very reasonable, but they like that. Like, this predator energy feeds off that space. So if what we can say is like, no, we are super powerful. We have met amazing people in this process, people with amazing gifts and talents, and that nature is on our side. Like, literally nature's on, like, I actually this week gave notice for my job that I love, but I was going to have to live a lie, like with these obligations about testing or injecting all these things. And I said, I can't do this anymore. And, not leaving in an angry way, but just like I have to move on. This is my push into the next thing. And we're on the river. It's a garden. It's this public garden. And I walked down to the water. It's on the Schuylkill River, and as I stood on the edge, and there was some tall, it's the end of the summer, so the weeds are kind of tall, and I couldn't see it. But then as I walked up, a big great blue heron like got up and flew just right across the river, and I was like, wow, like, that's pretty great. And then and then I was looking and like, what is the symbol? Like, okay, so what is that? This heron, and it said that. It's focus and determination in your own path. It's all of those things, and spirituality. So I'm like, okay, that was an affirmation, right? Like, I'm taking a risk. I'm stepping back. I'm trying to figure out what is this new thing. I will say, I try to do this stuff. My family doesn't get it. They're not on the same page as me. I think they still love me. I think they don't think I'm like, I think for a while, maybe they thought somehow I became like a right-wing something or other. I'm like, no, I'm not a thing. Like, I'm someone who's actually trying to stand up for what I think life should be.
Absolutely.
And that we're going to get there. Like, the thing is, like, once you understand we're more than just our body, that's actually pretty amazing. Like, we do what we can with our gifts, with the people we find along the way. And we're going to mess up, and then we do it, and then we try to fix it, and then we try to do better. I've met amazing people. It's been a gift. I would have a much more boring life if there wasn't a, like, attempted coup of God. My life would be really boring. So yeah, let's do this thing.
Let's do
make it beautiful.
Fantastic. I'm on board.
Send me some dandelions.
Oh,
I don't
absolutely.
think I've got any from Kansas. It could be leaves. It's all good. I need to go up to the Lucius Trust, and it's on Wall Street, and I gotta drop some dandelions on the UN.
Will do. What your address is on your blog, right?
Yeah, if you put Dandelion Manifest in it, my address is in there.
Okay. Well, speaking of which, why don't you tell the listeners where they can find you and your work and your words online?
Yeah, so I'm my blog is called Wrench in the Gears, wrench like the tool, .com. I haven't been writing as much, honestly, because I've been doing a lot of interviews and things, and this summer has been kind of a hard summer. But there's a big backlog of stuff. So I have a YouTube channel still. I have multiple strikes on it. You look up Alison McDowell, and on there it says about, and then I have a backup channel, which doesn't have many subscribers, but there's more stuff over there. And then I would say too, like people that I collaborate with, again, my friend Steffers, she blogs at something called A Piece, like a puzzle piece of Mindful. Really great stuff on nanotech R&D. And then another colleague, Raul Diego, has a platform called Silicon Icarus, and is doing some really amazing work in the last several months around the human capital finance gamification tech stuff. Really good. So
cool.
Yeah, there's a lot to explore. And
well, I'll put all those links in the episode notes.
Yeah.
And Alison, thank you so much for sitting down and sharing a couple of hours and some fantastic information. And thank you so much for all the research and dot connecting that you do. It's amazing. It's overwhelming, but at least hearing it put together in the way that you do, it doesn't feel as overwhelming. It feels like at least knowing about it is the first step to actually engaging with it. So thank you for what you do.
You know where to put the pieces in. And I just want to emphasize, too, a lot of this work is collaborative work. I couldn't do it without other people sharing their life experiences, their information. Really what we need most, in my opinion, is a horizontal movements where people are empowered to all contribute and all work on the knowledge building and the transmutation in articulating, because honestly, my stuff is so long form. It's not very accessible to a lot of people. So increasingly people have been taking material and reworking it, adding new stuff. And that is like, if we are successful at this, that's what it will be, is that people will take it out into the world in new ways. Make art out of it, sing it, like make a play out of it, street theater. Like there's a lot of options.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So join in, everybody. It's a collaborative effort.
It's a collective, yes.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, Alison, and have a great rest of your evening.
Okay, I will.
Okay, thanks. Let's do it again sometime.
All right. Very good.
Okay. All right. Farewell.
All right. See ya.
If you've liked what you've heard and would like to contribute to the Melt, there are a few ways that you can do that. The most tangible would be financially. Just click the Patreon link in the episode notes, and there you will find ways that you can contribute for as little as $3 a month. This will give you access to bonus episodes, early access to regular episodes, and you can also participate in monthly Zoom meetups. Contributing financially will also help make the Melt better, pay the bills, and help to make this podcast a full-time endeavor that I can fully devote my time to and provide you with more content. Another way of contributing would be to go to wherever it is that you subscribe to The Melt and give it a favorable review or rating, and this will help it to reach more people. You can also spread the word to friends and family via social media, email, or word of mouth. And lastly, if none of those options are readily available or appealing to you, simply send your positive thoughts and intentions. In an interconnected and quantumly entangled multiverse, these also go a long way. Thank you.